so good to see all of you. How are you? Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Okay, so this is a bit of a downer, but I'm starting with loneliness. Okay? And the reason why we're starting with loneliness is I think if this was a regular year, what we might do is talk about loneliness of leaders, right? Like rabbis feeling lonely, because I think that's real. But I also think that right now we are just leading communities that feel very, very lonely. And the two types of, isolation, alienation, a sense of just not having recourse or being silenced, right? All the things that come with loneliness, not belonging. I think there are two manifestations of it that compound each other in ways that are very hard for people right now. I think one manifestation, and it'll be interesting to see which of these manifestations feels like stronger for you in your communities, or maybe among which demographic does each of these feel stronger in your communities. One is just Jews feeling lonely in the world. Just Jews asking themselves, can we trust? Do we belong? Do people care about us? Do we matter? Are we safe? Where are our allies? Where did our allies go? And I think that's a profound feeling that I see people experiencing when they go to work. I think like they don't know what they can talk to their colleagues about or not talk to their colleagues about. I see people experiencing that when they want to do the kind of volunteer work or activism that they're used to, and they meet hostility. I see that among people when they're checking out the media and having pretty deep feelings about how Jews are being portrayed, purposely or not, in the media, incorrectly or not, in the media. And then I think there's another kind of loneliness, which is I think that there are a lot of subgroups within the Jewish people right now who are feeling very lonely when they're among each other. So we can take this in a manner that I experienced last year living in Israel. A lot of Israeli Jews are feeling very lonely when they see the way that American Jews are processing the war and what's going on. A lot of American Jews are feeling very lonely when they look at the Jewish state and they see the Jewish state doing things that they don't approve of or agree with, and they're still implicated by. Within our communities, we have subgroups of people who say, why don't people just agree with me? Why don't people just see it my way? Do I really belong here? How are you going to represent my perspective on things? And then you have people who have equally strong and opposite views who are asking you the same thing. And I think that's a type of loneliness also. And so what I'm hoping to do this morning is both to dig in to the contours of what those two types of loneliness are about. It's kind of ironic to pluralize loneliness, right? I guess, right? I want to dig into what we think those are about, and I want to make some suggestions based on the sources that I offered here, but you will have more suggestions. And then I want to talk about some classic responses, some classic Jewish responses to this kind of loneliness. And I think to echo Sarit's point, or maybe to even add a layer to it, what I want to do is I want to give you something to edit, right? Meaning you may agree with the way I understand what the loneliness is. You may agree with the classic responses that I'm offering to it. You also may not, but it may help stimulate your thinking in the directions that you want to go in a different kind of way, especially in conversation with colleagues, okay? So we want to have a lot of chavruta time. I don't think we have ice pops, which is sad for anybody who's been Here's my, I know, I love those ice pops. I don't think we have ice pops, but I want to give you a lot of chavruta time. So take a look at the sources, and I want to just walk you through what I try to do here. And then there's a choose your own adventure depending on the kind of time you have. So first of all, I divided it into the two parts, right? Roman numeral 1 is loneliness in the world. Roman numeral 2 is loneliness among our own people, okay? So the first decision you have to make is which one you want to start with, right? I thought it would be a good idea to go, kind of funnel, because I think that the loneliness among your own people is exacerbated by a sense of loneliness in the world, but that's not always the case for people who are lonely among their own people. It's actually sometimes specifically because they don't feel lonely in the world, right? They actually specifically feel lonely among their own people, right? So you decide, but within each one, what I tried to do is I tried to start off with something that would help us think about the contours of that loneliness, okay? So in number 1, for example, for loneliness in the world, I want us to think about ethical loneliness, which is essentially when you think something bad has happened to you, but nobody cares, meaning nobody takes it ethically seriously. Because I think to an extent that is a very, very deep part of the loneliness that people are feeling. And then when we look at loneliness among our own people, what I gave you are two sources. One is Yirmiyahu essentially saying, everybody mocks me when I try to explain to them my stance and what I think is the word of God, like really my ethical truth, right? They all mock me, and I'm almost like, should I not say anything? Should I stop talking? But no, I'm going to keep talking, right? Like that question of truth, the loneliness comes from people won't recognize your truth. And then the second source that I gave you, which is from the Babylonian Talmud, is a source that I just always think of when bad things happen, which is a source that really asks, what do we expect to happen when things go awry? What kind of self-reflection, introspection do we expect when things go awry? And I think a lot of people who are feeling very lonely right now, within the Jewish community, within conversations that we're having within the Jewish community, are basically saying, well, we thought that when everything hit the fan, you would figure out that you're doing something wrong, but you haven't figured that out, right? So part of it is not just nobody's listening to my truth, it's, well, I thought this cataclysm would actually help you realize that what I've been saying is right? And how come so it's compounded. So that's what we have in each of the lonelinesses to give us the beginnings of contours of the loneliness. And I invite you to add, obviously, right? And then within each section, I try to give you a few responses to loneliness. So in loneliness in the world, I'm offering 3 responses, and I don't want to be too heavy-handed on what those responses are. The first response I would call the long arc of history, which is number 2, or the long arc of covenant. The second response, which is numbers 3 to 6, I would call Jewish stubbornness as virtue. I know, right? And then number 7, response number 3, which I would call just a changed paradigm or changed expectations. Okay? So that's responses. And then going back to loneliness among our own people, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the first set was 2, which is response number 1, long arc of history. The second set, 3 to 6, is about the stubbornness of the Jewish people as a value. And the third is number 7, which is changing your paradigm or your expectations, okay? And then when you look at loneliness among our own people, I gave you, I think there are 2 responses, but I think it's all on a spectrum. I don't think it's so easy to divide these things. Number 11 is my colleague Deborah Barrer wrote a great piece about the way that the rabbis, she wrote it in sources if you haven't read it, about the way that the rabbis dealt with Amei Haaretz, meaning people who they essentially looked at and said, they're not our people, right? And how do we deal with that? Which is a form of how do you turn loneliness into policy, right? Whatever you're going to do. And then from 12 to 14, I actually gave you the Yerushalmi's version of Tanur Shalachnai, because the Yerushalmi's version is actually very different. And I think it's worth thinking about. Part of what creates loneliness is actually the expectation that your opinion is always going to win, right? Like really that expectation, and to take a look back at some first principles and ask if that's actually the way people should live, okay? Okay, then there's one outlier, which is David Kaufman, and that's just because I think it's really interesting because it's asking questions about whether our loneliness is in the world. How do we deal with our loneliness in the world when we still have a lot of power and we still have a lot of friends and we still, you know what I mean? That feeling of loneliness, like nobody's in Lodge right now, and you know what I mean? Like, how do you deal with that feeling of loneliness when some of it is you're like anticipating something, but it's not here, but what is it, right? And what do you do? Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Is that clear? Does anybody have any questions? So what I would say is, I guess you have two options. One is to decide to focus on one of these at the expense of the other. And you have plenty of time. You have till at least 10:45. So you might get to both. Another is if you want to spend time thinking about like the big questions in both, to play around a little bit and say, well, I'm really interested in thinking about the stubbornness question. I'm really interested in thinking about, the playing in the sandbox together question, which would be the Tanusha, right? So you can play a little bit. What time is it now? Does anybody know? 9:30. Great. So I think till at least 10:45, and then we'll check in with you. And my expectation and my hope is that when we come back, what I want to be able to do is give you a kind of arc of thinking, but then to really have a conversation, right? To really get a sense of where are you in thinking about this? What resonates with you? What questions does it lead to? What issues do you have with this kind of conversation? I think the way I want to do this is to do part one, then take comments and conversation, and then do part two, take comment conversation. We'll deal with each factor of the loneliness differently. And just to remind people who weren't at the opening, what we're talking about is two types of loneliness: lack of belonging, alienation, a sense of distrust, a sense of being out of place. One is Jews and the world, and another is Jews among ourselves because of our ideological differences. So in terms of the arc of confronting Jewish loneliness in the world, some of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention are not just what is the loneliness that we're feeling, where is it rooted, but because where it's rooted actually gives rise not just to practical responses, but actually gives rise to a whole orientation and way of being in the world. The responses that I wanted to offer you are not practical responses, right? We all know what the practical responses to loneliness are. The practical responses are find new friends. The practical responses are turn inward with your own people. The practical responses are try to tell your narrative outwards. I'm not so interested in those kinds of defense mechanisms because I think they're great and I think they're practical, but I actually think, especially on Yamim Noraim, we have the opportunity to talk to people about the way they are thinking about themselves and the world. And so that's really the question. When I read Jill Stauffer's Ethical Loneliness, and she says things like, a person feels violated, abandoned by humanity, a surrounding world that will not listen or cannot properly hear their testimony, their claims about what they've suffered and what is owed to them on their own terms, people who feel like they're not being heard, that is not just a practical problem. That is actually a problem of a person being able to look themselves in the mirror and feel like a dignified human being, right? And so the three responses that I wanted to offer that I think are classical responses, I want to go one by one. The first is from Eicha Rabbah, and I try to thank my colleagues as often as possible when they give me ideas, because I wouldn't be able to say the things that I say without the great conversations that I have with my colleagues. So my colleague Akiva Mattinson gave me the idea to look at this Eicha Rabbah text. When you look at this Eicha Rabbah text, the pathos of it is essentially of a person who believes that she has a covenant. This is number 2. She believes that she has a covenant, but nobody around her believes it. And I think if you've ever been in a situation, just to take the mundane one, especially because you're rabbis, you know how sometimes you go to things without a spouse? And people are like, are you guys really married? I've never seen you together, right? Now that is anywhere from annoying to grating to just really, right? But imagine it on the existential level. You are not who you think you are. You do not have the hope that you think you have. You do not have the future that you think you have. What do you actually do in that kind of situation? And I want to point out, the way you know this isn't practical is because it's not all about the fact that she turns to her neighbors and says, well, no, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. What she does is she turns inwards. So let's look at it. Number 2, Zot ashiv el libi al ken ochil. This is what I replied in my heart, and that is how I have hope. Notice, she's replying to herself. She's talking to herself. Rabbi Abba bar Kahana b'shem Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Abba bar Kahana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mashal lema devar domeh. What is this like, analogically, metaphorically? Lemelech shenasa matrona v'chatav laktuba meruba. Right? A monarch marries an important noblewoman and gives her a huge marriage settlement because that's what she's worth. Okay? V'amar la kach v'kach chupot ani yoselach. I'm going to give you this number of chuppahs. Kach v'kach argivanot tovot ani noten lach. I'm going to give you this number of gowns. Hinicha hamelech v'halach lo lemedinat hayam ve'echer l'sham. And, you know, honeymoon's over. He goes away on business. And I think ve'echer l'sham, it's too long. It's too long. I don't know that there's anybody, Israeli or American, Jew around the world, who doesn't feel like, oh God, it's too long. It's too long. This is too long. It's too long. Right? No matter what your reason is for thinking that. So nichnasu shchenotea etzla v'hayu maknitot ota. They mock her. Her neighbors, the people who are her neighbors, the people she used to borrow flour from, who used to borrow flour from her, right? Instead, they're mocking her, right? I'm sure this went viral. People saw this in Atlanta, that family where the across the street family has been mocking them for months and months, and their daughter was killed. She was a policewoman. Lubin, yeah. I'm saying, mock it, your neighbor. By the way, you should just know he's left you. He's gone. He's not coming back. And so she cries. She has the feeling of, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Maybe he's not coming back. And what does she do? She goes inwards and she says, well, let me return to what I think this relationship is. I'm going to read my ketubah again. And she sees in her ketubah, I'm going to give you this number of bridal canopies. I'm going to give you this number of gowns. She is comforted. She's not comforted because people stop telling her she's off and she has no hope. She's comforted because she returns herself to the anchor of the long arc of that covenant. What she does is, instead of focusing on the pain of right now, she says, I have a long arc of this covenant. It is not over, even if people are trying to tell me that it is. Liyamim ba hamelach amarla, and eventually he comes back and he says, BT, no better indication of a patriarchal culture than a husband calling his wife, my daughter. Okay, but it's a term of affection. Okay, BT. I wonder, how'd you wait so long? Amrla Adoni Amelech, there's another indication. My master the king. Il malek tuba miruba shekatavta v'natatali kvar ibduni shchenotai. If not for the big tuba that you gave me, he didn't give her anything. He gave her a promise. That's what he gave her. Okay? Kach ovdei kochavim monin et Yisrael, v'omrim lahem, so pagans rib the Jewish people and say, Elohechem histir panav mikem, your God is hiding the divine face from you, v'silek shchinato mikem, and is left you. Od enu chozer elechem, is not coming back. V'hen bochinu mitanchin. Now this, I would imagine, has something to do with Christianity. V'hen bochinu mitanchin, and they cry. V'kivan shenichnasin lebate knesiot lebate midrashot v'korin b'torah. When they come inward to their Jewish places and they read the Torah, which is our ketubah, motzi'in shekatuv, and they find that it says, ufaniti alechem v'ifreiti etchem. This is before the curses in Vayikra 26, right? This is not after, this is before the curses. I will turn to you, I will make you numerous, v'natati mishkani b'tochechem, I will put my dwelling among you, v'talachti b'tochechem, I will walk among you, v'hein mitnachamim, and they're comforted, right? There's something to the fact that simply gathering and reaffirming the covenant between God and the Jewish people is an act of dealing with that loneliness. It is looking at the long arc of the Jewish story instead of getting stuck in what feels like the hopelessness of the short arc. Now, I have to tell you, this is an overtly theological version of it, which I think is quite important for people to be talking about right now. I also think there is a more secularized version, and Flora, are you in here? Is Flora in here right now? She's not in here. Yeah. We were talking about this yesterday. We were talking about, I'm just saying me. Even when I have disagreements with things that I see coming out of the state of Israel, I essentially say to myself, what does it mean to be a Jew who believes that we as Jews walk through history together, through a long arc, and what right do I have to abandon the people with whom I walk through history, past, present, and future? What right do I have? That's my secularized version of it. So that's one perspective here, is to say, get above it. Yes, cry about it, get above it. Figure out what the long arc is about, what the mission is, what the covenant means, and hold tight to that. Because that is not just a wind that's going to sweep you away. That is an anchor that is going to keep you who you are through something very, very difficult. The second response that I want to offer, and this is my favorite. Do you ever think to yourself what it means to say that the Jews are a stiff-necked people? Right? Half the people, when I say Jews are a stiff-necked people, everybody laughs. But like, how did stiff-necked become stubborn? Meaning, I understand stiff is stubborn, I get that. But stiff-necked, what's stiff-necked? So, Yirmiyahu tells us in number 4, and there ain't nobody who knows like Yirmiyahu how stiff-necked we are, right? You're stiff-necked, it means you can't turn your ear to listen. It means you can't turn your ear to listen. In number 4, velo sham'u, they didn't listen to me. Velo hitu et oznam, they didn't turn their ear. Vayakshu et orpam, instead, they stiffened their necks. Hereu me avotam, they're worse than their ancestors. Now, I think it's quite interesting that when we meet the term kshei oref, or when we see the term kshei oref, stiff-necked, in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, it is really bad. It's really negative. Essentially, God is basically saying to Moshe, let's go over how stiff-necked these people are, and good luck to them when you're gone, right? And by the way, I do want to suggest that in Devarim, what you see is the most stiff-necked of all is God, because why is God giving these people chances over and over again if they never listen, right? It's like, where'd we get it from? It's a little imitatio Dei, right? God is actually the most stiff-necked of them all. Thank God for that. But I think it's interesting to see the way the concept actually evolved over time. So, for example, when you look in the Talmud in Beit, Kaf Hey Amud Bet, 25b and number 5, what you see is a very unflattering portrait also, okay? Although I want to say a very unflattering portrait, but it also could be a little bit of a hidden transcript for people who are living under the thumb of a big empire. So take a look at number 5. Tana b'shmei Rabbi Meir. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Meir. Mipnei man ditn the Torah l'Yisrael. Why was Torah given to Israel? Mipnei she'en azin. and I have a son named Azan, because they are strong, because they are brazen, because they are chutzpahdik. We need Torah to domesticate us, okay? Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, taught in the name of the house of Rabbi Yishmael, Mimi no eish dat lamo, the Torah is talked about as an eish, right, as a fire. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Re'uyin halalu shetinatan lahem dat eish. These people should be given a fire law. Ika da Amri, and some people say it's dateim shel elu eish. These people, the law, meaning their nature, is they're so fiery. She'ilmalei lo nitna Torah l'Yisrael, if Torah had not been given to Israel, ein kol umav lashon yicholin la'mod bifnehem, nobody would be able to stand before them. We are so fiery, we need Torah to domesticate us. Now, on the one hand, that's not very flattering, but on the other hand, when you're living under other empires, it actually helps you a lot to tell yourself, well, if not for the fact that Torah was domesticating us, we would beat all y'all, right? Meaning there's a little bit more, but suffice to say, it's not positive. I am fascinated that you get to the 9th or 10th century in Shemot Rabbah, and suddenly somebody says, I've got a positive read on Kshei Orif. What made them turn? Take a look at number 6, right? You're going to have some negative reads. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, God says to Moshe, Ra'iti et ha'am hazeh, Mahu, I've seen what these people are. V'nei am Kshei Orif hu, these people are clearly stiff-necked. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Polvaya b'shem Rabbi Meir re'uyim hein lehe'aref. They should be beheaded. Now that's a terrible thing to say, but if you ask me what I think might be going on there, is it's actually a reading of Jewish martyrdom as punishment. Meaning we've obviously done something wrong, and therefore there's some martyrdom that's being asked of us because we've done something wrong. Amar Rav Yakim says, yeah, they're the most chatzuf. I'm going to skip. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Redifa b'shem Rabbi Ami. Atasa v'orshehu lignai. You think it's a negative to say that people are stiff-necked? Ve'eno le'ela l'shivchan. This is actually a shevach. It's a commendation. O Yehudi, o tzaluf. Don't you have to be stiff-necked to say, I'm either going to live as a Jew or die as a Jew? When somebody says, you've got the cross, you got the cross or the sword, and you say, I'm either going to live as a Jew or I'm going to die. That's not stiff-necked. That's 100% that's stiff-necked. And to me, I look at this and I say to myself, we are so soft. We've gone so soft. In the 250 years of American exceptionalism, we've gone so soft. We are stubborn. Be stubborn. Be stubborn. Don't give up. How do we say to people, you're sitting there, you're crying, you're lonely, we are stubborn people. We do not give up. And that means we can handle suffering, and it's terrible, and it's terrifying. And I have to tell you, I felt that this year in just the craziest ways. I was at, people, I don't know if people know, I spent the year in Israel this year with my family because we felt like that was the place we wanted to be. And God willing, we're going back tomorrow for a second year because my kids agreed to do a second year. My husband was able to get it. We're crazy people. We're going from one crucible to another crucible. But to me, betoch ami anochi yoshavet. I live among my people. My people need me. Not that I'm so important, but another hug doesn't hurt. A vote of confidence doesn't hurt. Being with people in the shelter doesn't hurt. So earlier in the year, our friend's son died in a tank accident in Jabalia. And I was at we were at the funeral and we were at the Shiva. And at the Shiva, I was davening with her, like sitting next to her. And she turns to me and she says, I just couldn't believe it. She said, it's really bashert that you were here, and don't let this ruin your year. So I was like, wow, that is Kshei Orif if I've ever heard it. That is a strong, dignified human being. I've never heard such a thing in my life. Never heard such a thing. Meaning we can handle more than we know we can handle. But I think Kshei Orif is also don't give up on the things that you are trying to fix and work towards. Don't give up. So that's the second. And the third that I want to suggest comes from the Gemara in Chagiga, Hey Amud Aleph to Hey Amud Bet, 5a to 5b, where essentially you see rabbis trying to figure out, okay, we're in a hard time. Now what? how do we think about ourselves when we're in a hard time? Do we think of ourselves as completely abandoned? How do we think? And what I think is so creative here is the paradigm shift. It's, okay, it's not what it was, but it's not gone, and it's not nothing. And there's something still here worth holding on to. And so you see it in two different ways here in number 7. V'chara api bo bayom, v'azavtim v'istarti fanai mehem. Right, just a pasuk in Dvarim. I will be angry, God says, and leave you, or leave them, and I'm going to hide my face from them. And this is amazing because the word mehem, right? V'istarti panai mehem, I will hide my face from them. Amar Rav Bar Delai Bar Tivyome, Amar Rav, so these people say, Kol she'enu behester panim, anybody who hasn't experienced divine hiddenness, eino mehem, is not a member of the Jewish people. Yeah. Whoa, talk about trying to subvert loneliness into belonging. Very creative. It's very creative. Meaning, I'm not saying it works for everybody, it's not about that. It's just creative, right? It's just creative. Kol she'enu v'haya le'echol, anybody who isn't in the continued part of it, which is that you get consumed in some way. And by the way, the examples that they give after that end up being a little bit more prosaic. People losing their money to the government, but fine. Eino mehem is not one of them. So that's one. And I think a lot of people in some ways are instinctively afraid of that, kind of a return to Jewish history, that this is part of what the Jews. But I also think that some people can actually look at that and say, again, we have reserves, we have a history, we are a people, we belong here. Va'anochi haster astir panai bayomahu, and continuing to the next pasuk in Dvarim, I'm going to hide my face. Amar Rava says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Af al pi sheistarti panai mehem, even though I'm hiding my face, b'chalom ader, I'll speak to them in a dream, right? Rav Yosef says, well, even though God's hiding God's face, yadonetu yalenu, God's hand is there. Shenamar v'tzel yadi kisiticha, I'm going to cover you. Meaning, you can take any of these at face value, right? Oh, thank you. It's good to know somebody's listening, and especially somebody with a sense of humor in the midst of all this loneliness. Thank you, Michelle. You can take each of these at face value, right? What does it mean to feel a sense of belonging to the Jewish people over, vertical time, and not just horizontal time, meaning vertical time? What does it mean to kind of say, okay, we're living in a kind of the covenant is shrouded in some way, and it's not as, happy-go-lucky kumbaya. But I also think the methodology is powerful. The methodology is simply, okay, we thought it was going to be this. Now it's this prime, and we need to think in new ways about who we are and what we are. Meaning it's really just making a paradigm shift. So those are the three, I think, orientational, three of the orientational responses that one might adopt, right? 1, the longer arc of history and the covenant. 2, a sense of let's embrace our stiff-neckedness. And 3, let's think about paradigm shifts. What do other paradigms actually look like? And what I gave you from Kaufman, I think he does a good job telling you some of the practical things that happened. But I also think what's very powerful about what he's writing, I don't know if everybody read it, but he basically says, and let's look at 8 for a minute. He says, middle of paragraph 3. Actually, let's start from the beginning. Has everything changed? It's tempting to say October 7th changed everything, and in some ways it did. The feelings of insecurity, the wondering whether our vertical alliances with political elites will truly protect us, the feelings of abandonment, and the questioning of whether our horizontal neighbors, actually like us. These all feel shockingly new, especially for Canadian Jews, which is how he's writing, born after World War II. Anti-Semitic incidents have skyrocketed at staggering rates. But as a historian, I find myself wary. We know that traumas can feel transformative in the moment, only to see over time that much of the basic structure of life remains as it was. Maurice Blanchot, am I doing that right, my Canadian friends? Blanchot. Thank you, Aubrey. Blanchot. The French Jewish, as you can tell, I'm very American. The French Jewish literary theorist captured this paradox when he wrote about the Holocaust, a trauma far greater, in his book, The Writing of Disaster. The disaster changes everything, meanwhile, leaving everything intact. From my perspective, it's still too soon to say whether October 7th and its aftermath have fundamentally reordered Jewish life in Canada, despite the very real emergence of a new form of hatred, bigotry, and exclusion that suddenly appears everywhere and seems, at least to most Canadians, to be socially acceptable. Canadian Jews are traumatized, rocked by a tidal wave of fear, anger, and grief, but trauma is not the same thing as structural change. In terms of legislation, policy, socioeconomic standing, and much of our embeddedness within Canadian society, most of what was true on October 6, 2023 remains true today in July 2025, which is why it's kind of a gaslighty moment, right? Because it's what's still true, what's not true. While it's much harder to be an out and proud Jew in certain sectors of Canadian society today, humanities departments at universities, social work settings, literary and artistic circles, etc., Jews are still getting mortgages and jobs, accepted to university, freely associating in public and communal spaces, experiencing fair treatment in courts, elections, and businesses, as well as on playing fields and otherwise living their lives. What has shifted, and profoundly so, is the social psychology of Canadian Jews. Our assumptions about safety, trust, acceptance, and solidarity have been punctured. Our optimism, though always cautious, given the many descendants of Holocaust survivors in our communities and leadership, has given way to new anxieties, etc. I think it's useful to think about what he's saying, not because I accepted whole hog. I'm actually much more of a Judeo-pessimist, so I'm not like, okay, nothing's wrong. No, a lot is wrong, actually. A lot is wrong. But I do think we are in this weird limbo state where you're starting to see certain systemic things crop up, and other systemic things seem to be going just fine, and it's a little bit confusing. And I think that's just worth thinking about. I want to pause there on a read of the loneliness of Jews in the world being an ethical kind of loneliness read, that people can't see our suffering on our own terms the way we try to explain it. 3 responses to that being, are we looking at the long arc of the covenant, whether in a religious way or in a more secularized way? Are we looking at our possibility of being stubborn, both in terms of being able to take hits, but also being able to try and try and try again? Are we able to make somewhat of a paradigm shift as the 3rd response? And I just want to open it up and see what people have to say about any of that before we go to the second half. Is that okay? And you can feel free to be like, I totally disagree with you. I think that, meaning this is actually, the point is to generate conversation and thought about these things. And I don't expect us all to agree. I hope we don't all agree. That would be very boring. Anybody have anything they want to say? Okay, so just raise your hands high and we'll just make a queue. Okay, thanks, Alice. Okay, so we'll go this way. Tom and, remind me? Rivka. Okay, Tom, Rivka, Andrea. Great, we'll go that way. And maybe we'll take all 3, and then so that it can be more of a conversation and less of a ping pong. I think Tom, and then Rivka, and then Andrea. There's 2 mics. Yeah, go for it, Tom. Does everybody know who you are? Probably not. Please, tell us. Everybody cares. If they don't care, they're making a key mistake in life.
Okay, is that better? Good. Hi,
yes.
Tom Albert. Hi. So the notion that we are incredibly powerful and it is the Torah that has to keep us restrained because otherwise our power could destroy everything feels like a concept that has some resonance at the moment. And I'll just leave it at that.
Don't leave it at that. Say what you mean.
All right. Well, it's what it feels...
Just so that I can eat more.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Say what you mean.
It's what it feels to me like the Israeli government is doing at the moment. It is that it has a kind of unlimited power. It's though its power is unleashed without any kind of constraints of this type of...
And that's how it's resonating with you. And the question of how Torah... how Jewish values can actually pull that back.
Correct.
I told you it wasn't going to be ping pong, and then I did it. Rivka.
Hello, this is just a comment.
And just tell everybody who you are.
Rivka Glick from Chicago. So this is just a comment. I really loved your first piece And as I read it this time, I thought it echoed Psalm 27 for the holidays. That it doesn't end with, oh, everything's going to be great, but we hope and wait to be in your presence. And I just felt like we're not going to read this story, but this is Psalm 27 for me.
Andrea, if you could tell everybody who you are.
Hi, Andy Merrow. They got my name wrong. That's okay. First of all, thank you. Love your text, love your selections. And when I first read
Can you say
it,
that louder into the mic?
Yes,
Appreciate
love
that.
everything
So
Elana
you guys caught that?
Stein
You caught that?
Hain says.
Great, awesome.
Yeah, okay.
Now just send it to my kids. Wow, great.
And I was wondering how I would hold this and use it while also seeing the half of my congregation who's saying, yeah, but don't you think the Palestinians also feel this sense of loneliness? And how we both say this for ourselves, but for every group of people. And I want to be particularist, and I also want to be universalist. And I really want to be particularist, but I feel like I have to be both.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. It's really powerful. Right? There's a human condition element, and there's also the way the collectives see themselves and their futures. No question. I think it's very parallel. Meaning, I think the Middle East is full of lonely people, and full of lonely subgroups wondering what their futures are. I think it's full like that. It's how it feels. Did we have more comments? Okay, so I don't know everybody's name. We got Aubrey, James, and then Jonathan. Just kidding. Jonathan, Aubrey, James.
I'm just floating something out there that we were wrestling with in our chavruta as to whether or not, if I had to imagine the one sentiment that is keeping me up most horrifically at night, if it's loneliness per se, or if that's just the best basket we can find for this mess that feels much grayer and darker and more confusing and confounding than even last year. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a part of me that felt more lonely this time last year, and I'm not sure that loneliness is like scratching my itch right now, and I'm just hoping that maybe I can either understand how maybe it's there and I'm just not perceiving it, or maybe it's something else.
Or maybe that's not where you are.
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see when we get to the second half, which more of an ethical kind of truth stance. Loneliness, I think we're experiencing a lot of that right now, especially because things feel so murky, because people can't agree on what's right at this point, or they don't even understand what's going on anymore at this point. So maybe in that second half, but let's see. Aubrey and James?
Hi, I'm James Fader from New Jersey.
Hi.
Building off of Andy's point and sort of going back to the ethical loneliness part, I think when we were talking in our chavruta, something that, in a way, perhaps because it was a way to tap into sort of anger, it felt activating. And I think it's very true, obviously, that Jews and Palestinians are feeling this ethical loneliness in very deep and profound ways. And my first instinct was to sort of like I think a lot of us are stuck in the why can't Palestinians understand our suffering? And a lot of Palestinians are stuck in why can't Israelis understand our suffering? And actually what I think that this model says is we are both feeling this profound loneliness. We are in an ongoing trauma. The rest of the world, they need to recognize both of our pains. Like the world, the people that are not living this need to be willing to crack themselves open a little bit more to recognize all of the hurt, all of the suffering that's happening in this moment. And that shift actually
All right, it's
felt
much
good.
easier. It's much easier to choose whose ethical loneliness you're willing to see, and of course, it's made more difficult by the way people. It's made more difficult by the actors in the region, right? Like I'll tell you, for myself, it's very hard for me to have empathy towards the Palestinian cause because Hamas right now runs the Palestinian cause, right? And how that happened and why that happened and right, that kind of thing. And I think for some people, it's very hard, for many people, it's very hard to have any sense of sympathy for Israel because Israel has tanks and has guns and has land and has occupation, and right? So I think it's very hard for people to be able, and not that I am making any, I just want to be very, 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 very clear. I am not making any parallel between the actors in the first part of what I said and the actors in the second part of what I said. Like, this is not like because I want to be politically correct. It's because in no universe are they in any way close to each other in any universe. But I think you're right. It's very hard to hold sympathy and empathy for multiple people. And certainly there's a whole question of, do you blame people for their own suffering, and how does that work? Do you want to say something further?
Well, just I think, especially for us on both sides that are in this ongoing trauma, it's so much harder. Whereas like what we need from the rest of the world is to be trying to support both of us in our suffering, to recognize both of our stories rather than exacerbating the problem.
Yes, well said. What do we need from the world? And the we being both peoples. Really interesting. Aubrey.
So I wanted to just echo part of what Jonathan was feeling, that maybe it's something deeper and wider than loneliness, even though it's a great category for our conversation. And it goes back to the question that you're posing to us. It seems like a question and a challenge that I'm curious to hear more about from you in terms of the limits of the paradigm shift. And it feels to me, based on the text that you brought to us, which are wonderful and inviting, that I just want to focus on the God part of the question. And the God that's being presented here is definitely a God of personhood rather than another paradigm. And it seems like, especially with this idea of being part of a people where we accept that the theology is of Hester Panim, and if you can't accept that, then you're not part of the people, is I'm not sure how much that gives the suffering that we're going through right now as leaders and as people enough grist for the mill to process what we're going through. I think we actually really desperately need, as you're suggesting, and that's why I'm curious to hear from you, what you're imagining. I feel like the paradigm has to shift in terms of how we relate to God. We need another paradigm of God to emerge. And what I'm suggesting in terms of the sources you've brought, and I want to hear from you about it more, is that maybe we've reached a point now in this crisis where we're realizing that Hester Panim is not sufficient, that the anthropomorphic view of this God that's presented in these texts is not going to be what this moment is calling for. So I'm just curious.
Can you say the next sentence of what you're not saying?
I could, but I want to hear from you first.
Yeah, but I'm curious where you're coming from. Sorry.
Well, I'm
Teaching is empathy.
coming from a place that I've exhausted my ability to relate to the theology of God as a person, and I'm finding much more comfort and alleviation of the anxiety that Jonathan is presenting, and that I think we're all feeling, that God is a process. So we can, in Jewish terms, we'd say, like the way Kaplan spoke about God as being the process that makes for salvation, and that we have some kind of agency, and that there is a way of being able to move through this and to process it that will open us in new directions. Because it doesn't seem to me like the paradigm of the God that we have in these texts is sufficient and necessary
So just
for the
a
moment.
layup. You're just asking me to make a layup here? Is that your plan? No problem. So I will tell you, did other people want to say something about this? Tell people who you are.
I'm thinking that the first, the mashal of the king actually addresses that, because he has abandoned her, but whatever he left her is what gives her the strength to keep going, even if he's not there. Like, the nimshal is that we, the Jews, have navigated through history not because we have encountered God, but because we went to study halls and synagogues and we've encountered other Jews.
Well, so it's interesting. I'll tell you just from my own theology. Did you want to say something also, Deborah? Wait, Rabbi Newman Kamen wants to say something too.
Official.
Please.
Deborah Newman came in. I
Yeah.
actually something I want to follow up because something that you said, Jonathan, which are in these texts, but I couldn't really articulate in my own head. And I don't know that this is what you feel, but this is sort of my reaction to what you said, which is the first year was really hard. But the slogan in Israel, like "United, we will prevail," and the Jewish community raised a ton of money.
Yep.
And, we were all kind of in this together, and our hostage, whatever. And year two, all of that illusion that we were united in any way is totally gone. Israeli society is, eating itself inside out about which is the right direction to go.
Yep.
And the Jewish community in America is following the same way. And your text about even in a room like this, there's a little bit of unsafety to say, if I tell you that I think this, you're going to judge me as that.
Yep.
So that sense of like, the synagogue, the study halls, the places where that would have been our safe haven, in theory, don't feel so safe. So
Yep.
anything I say to my congregation this year, there's going to be somebody thinking, but why didn't you say that?
Yes.
I
So
think
what you're
that
making-
adds to the loneliness and the severe anxiety on my part.
Agreed. I think that's going to help us when we move to part two. I want to say something about theology, and Aubrey, I'm being honest about my own theology, which is I don't believe in process theology. I believe in like a God who is an entity and is aware of all of what humanity is up to. Like that's what I believe in. My version of the question of where human choice, what role human choice plays, my version of it is a major tenet of God's engagement with the world is that human beings have free will. And that free will, they can use it to do the worst things and they can use it to do the best things. And oftentimes God steps back and says, go. Have your free will. I'm not gonna engage it. I think in my theology, because God is still there as an active intervention, the question for me that I'll never understand because it's a world of mystery is when does God choose to intervene and when does God not, right? Is it as the gates of Auschwitz are entering their umpteenth person, God says, okay, now it's time, and what does that even look like, right? That's where the mystery is gonna sit for me. But I don't think that even having a God who is interventionist precludes the ability to recognize that the default of the world, in a Maimonidean sense, the default of the world is human beings have free choice. And it means we could be mucking things up as Jews, right? Everybody else could be mucking things up. We all could be mucking things up. Right? So I don't think it absolves people. It's not a quietistic version, right? So that's where I am. I hope that's helpful. Let's do one more, Daniel, and then I'm going to move on. I appreciate that question.
I just want to add, and I'm sure many people have already read this. I had a chance to read Yitzhak Greenberg's Theology, and I think part of the way that he, resolves this is by talking about how God has done tzimtzum and granted human beings full responsibility, but in doing so, also made God's self sort of most close with us, and that what we internalize as abandonment is also a calling forth into sort of the highest level of covenant, and he articulates these things in a way that have been...
Well, it's so interesting because all three of these pathways, process theology, Yitzhak's third stage, right, of divine covenant, and the way that I'm describing the importance of free choice, all of them are actually trying to wrestle with the idea that none of us are looking for quietism because it's very hard to explain the world working that way. It doesn't... You know what I mean? It's hard to explain philosophically, and it's hard to explain practically, right? So I think all three of those are doing certain things, but the differences are real theological commitment differences, right? So I appreciate that. Okay, let's move on to section 2. For all those who were interested in that little interlude, Thank you for sticking with us. For those who were not, I hope you did something else on your phones. Okay? Let's look at, everybody's got their own thing. Let's look at loneliness among the Jewish people, among our own people. And I think Deborah and Jonathan, this is what I'm talking about. We don't have to call it loneliness. We can call it incredible disorder, disregard for each other, discomfort with each other, anger at each other, right? There are lots of things we could call it. And so what I tried to do here is I tried to give you, Yirmiyahu, the things that are strongest to me about these psukim, is that he says basically, lischok, hayiti lischok, kolayom, people are laughing at me. People are laughing at me. Kulolo egli, people are making fun of me, right? And essentially, I want to ask myself, is it worth even saying anything anymore? Because I'm not getting any, the same way in the ethical loneliness example in the first part, nobody understood my suffering. In this part, nobody understands my perspective. Nobody respects my perspective. Nobody's willing to give me a hearing. What am I even doing here? And what I think is more powerful even is when you look at number 10, and it goes back to this question of, do we all understand what we're doing here? Or actually, when we get here, is that dafka when we realize none of us understand each other? So you look in the Gemara in Megillah, Vayasar HaMelech Tabato, the Achashverosh takes off his ring, Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Gedolah HaSarat HaTabat, Yoter Mi 48 Nevi'im V'Sheva Neviot Shenitnamu Lahen L'Yisrael. Taking off that ring and threatening the Jewish people, that did more for Jewish identity than all of the Nevi'im and Nevi'ot put together who had been trying to say, come back, right? Shekulam lo hechzirum lemutav, none of them were able to bring them back to good. V'ilu asarat tabat, taking off the ring, hechziratan lemutav, it brought them back to good. Now guess what? What the heck is mutav? What's the good? So here we go. I've been telling you for 10 years, Rabbi, that Trump is the best friend the Jews ever had. Don't you realize what Iran did and how he stood up for it? Aren't you ready? Lahachzir lemutav, lachzor lemutav? Aren't you ready to renege on where you were and come back to some sanity? I've been telling you for years that Israel as this, don't take this out of context, that Israel as an ethno-state doesn't work and it won't work. Did not October 7th and these 22 months teach you anything? Come back. Limutav. Do you not see the terrible threat that everybody is under because of this? I've been telling you for years that hawkish policies are the way to go. All those people who were living in the OTEF didn't know what they were talking about. Don't you see what the actual threat is right now? Right? Meaning what everybody is expecting in this cataclysm. It's not just that people don't agree with me. It's everybody is expecting in this cataclysm that people will finally come to their senses. What is coming to their senses? Coming to their senses what? Coming to their senses that the war is right? Coming to their senses that the war is wrong? Coming to the senses that the Democratic Party loves the Jews, that they hate the Jews, that Jews belong in university, that Jews don't belong in university? What are we talking about here? Right? And we can't agree. So my question is, okay, what do we do? What do we do? So I have two classic responses to this issue. And in some ways, they're very connected to each other. In other ways, they're maybe at odds. But let's play it out, okay? The first is from my colleague, and we're going to do this again. I'm going to suggest and then ask you to chime in and tell us what you think. My colleague, Sarit, suggested that I look at this for this class. I appreciate it, Sarit. I think it's really helpful. Deborah Barrer wrote this piece, When Community Becomes a Zero-Sum Game, Lessons from a Troubling Talmudic Text. She wrote it in sources. And essentially what she looked at are the examples of the way that the rabbis in the Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, talk about Amei Haaretz, those who are non-rabbinic Jews. And she says, I see some pretty vicious stuff in there. But the vicious stuff is the outlier. That's not the main. The main, she says, is boundaried coexistence. Let's take a look. V'lo yisa, and this is uncomfortable, number 11, V'lo yisa bat amei haaretz mipnei shehin sheket unishoteim sheretz. A person, a rabbinite, should not marry the daughter of an am haaretz because they are vermin and their wives are similar to vermin. Ve'al bnotehen hu omer aru shochevim kol behema. And I'm not even going to translate it, okay? It's very vicious, okay? It's very, very vicious. And she argues that the rabbis were no fans of the Amei Haaretz, but most of what you see in the way they talk is not this kind of viciousness. Mostly what you see in the way they talk is, how are you going to figure out if there's an Am Haaretz who you're borrowing something from or they're borrowing something from you, how are you going to figure out that you don't cross your own boundaries when it comes to Jewish law and do things the way that they do, right? Like it's trying to figure out a boundary. So I think it's very powerful to suggest, if you look at, I would say, let's start page 7. The rabbis emerged onto the historical scene in the wake of a period of deep fissures. This is in number 11, bottom of page 7. Within the Jewish community, scholars often refer not to Second Temple Judaism, but to Second Temple Judaisms to underscore the divisions of the period, in which each group vied to emerge triumphant as the true Judaism that would define the Jewish future. We could easily imagine a world in which the apocalyptic tenor of some Talmudic Second Temple texts, like the war scrolls from the community at Qumran, continued to shape Jewish life even after the Second Temple was destroyed, meaning sectarian fighting. Strikingly, this is not what we find. The rabbis do not adopt the sectarian mantle, waging an ideological war against Amei Haaretz and their alternative vision for Jewish life. The language of B Psachim 49b, which we just read, remains an outlier. Instead, the rabbis repeatedly opt for a strategy of boundaried coexistence. And this approach allows them to do something crucial, to focus not on fighting, but on building. The Talmud can be understood in many different ways, but I read it as a conversation that explores the question of how the Jewish people should live. Admittedly, it is a conversation that often meanders, diving into such detail that the reader may lose sight of the forest for the trees. But while the Talmud is not a manual or step-by-step guide for how to live, it models vibrant engagement with that question. The rabbis were actively working out and deepening their vision for Jewish life, and they clearly found their experience of Torah life-giving. Last paragraph. So it seems did others. How the rabbis evolved from a marginal group to the powerhouse driving Jewish life remains something of an open question. But I think part of what allowed them to carry the day was simply this. They believed deeply in their path, that they expected it to be compelling in and of itself. Rather than focusing, or so deeply in their path that they expected it to be compelling in and of itself, rather than focusing on defending their vision of Judaism, they focused on living it. At times, like the rest of us, they were goaded into internecine disputes. At times, they responded to fear by lashing out, as in Psachim 49b, when they seek to rhetorically destroy those who threaten to undermine everything they hold dear. The rabbis, after all, were human. But then she says, that's part of the struggle, but that's not the goal, that's not the MO. The MO is not to spend time yelling at each other. The MO is to try to build your vision. Now, what you do for that in a community, I think, is a very good question. How do you practically engage a community in that way? Is it that you come up with the things that all different sectors of the community actually can hold on to together as a vision, and that's how you talk? Is it that you give people their lanes within the community? You build here, you build there, right? Is it that you actually form a community that's pretty single-minded, right? These are good questions, but it's an approach, it's an orientation that basically says, I'm going to build. I'm not going to be involved in strife and struggle. That is not going to be my orientation to how I engage, okay? The second approach, I think, is a little bit different, and it's taking you back to the Tanur Shalachnai story, and I think this is incredibly powerful. If I were to ask you, in the Tanur Shalachnai story, who did wrong? Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, who refuses to cede to the rabbis, or the rabbis who excommunicate him? I'm going to ask for a raise of hands. Who did wrong? Did Rabbi Eliezer do wrong by refusing to cede to the rules of the game? Anybody? Okay. Did the rabbis do wrong by excommunicating him? Exactly. I think that in the Bavli, they actually give you room for both. Because if you read the continuation of the story, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus actually kills Rabbi Gamliel because he prays for his death, right? Because he's so mad. So you see him getting a little blame at the end. I think in the Yerushalmi, it's basically mostly Rabbi Eliezer's problem. Mostly Rabbi Eliezer's problem. And this is a very different approach. It's not, there are rules of this game. There are rules of this game. You want to play in this sandbox? You play by the rules of the sandbox. Let's take a look. Bikshu lenadot et Rabbi Eliezer in number 12. Did everybody read this? Who got to read this? Raise your hand if you read it. Okay, so enough people haven't read it, and the people who have, how rusty is your Palestinian Aramaic? You know what I'm saying? Let's do it again. Bikshu lenadot et Rabbi Eliezer. They wanted to do nidui, excommunication, which is not exactly the same as cherem, but we'll leave that for another time. But it's basically excommunication. They wanted to excommunicate Rabbi Eliezer. Why did they want to excommunicate Rabbi Eliezer? It's this simple. They wanted to excommunicate Rabbi Eliezer because they had made a decision about the oven of Achnai, and he was unwilling to follow it. He had not done any shenanigans. He simply said, I will not abide by the rules of this court. I will continue using the oven of Achnai the way that I think it's meant to be used, which means it does not become tameh, which means any truma that's in it I can consider tahor, and that's it. And they said, what are you doing? That's not the way this works. What are you doing? You can't do that. So they want to excommunicate him. So I'm reading, they said, man azamodele, who's going to go tell Rabbi Eliezer? Guy, he's got a temper. Rabbi Akiva's student says, Ana azamodele, I'm going to tell him. Atalagabe, he went to him, Amarle says, Rabbi, chaverecha minadin lach. Your fellows are excommunicating you. Naste nafakle livra, so you know what he did? He said, hey, Rabbi Akiva, come outside. He took him outside, Amar, and he says, charavita, carob tree, in halacha k'divrayim itokrin. If the halacha follows them, be uprooted. Below itokrat, and it didn't get uprooted. In halacha k'dvarai itokrin. If the halacha is like me, then get uprooted. You see what happens here? He does this after they try to excommunicate him. I mean, he's already been stubborn, and now he's trying to be stubborn again. How can you excommunicate? But I'm right. But I'm right. Okay? In halacha k'divrayim chozrin, and then he looks at the aqueduct. If the halacha follows them, go in the other direction. V'lo chazart, it didn't. In halacha k'divrei chozrin, and if I'm right, then go back the chazart, and they did. Or maybe we're actually talking about the tree going back. It's not clear, right? Kol hadin shivcha v'leit halacha k'Rabbi Eliezer. All of this impressive stuff, and the halacha doesn't follow Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Rabbi Chanina says, Mishenitna lo nitna ela charei rabim latot. When the Torah was given to follow the majority. There are rules. There's a way that we do this, people. There's a way that we do this. And this is the best part of the Yerushalmi, in my opinion. Yerushalmi says, Rabbi Eliezer didn't know that. He didn't know that. V'leit Rabbi Eliezer yada shacharei rabim latot. Rabbi Eliezer didn't read Shemot. He didn't know that you're supposed to follow the majority. Of course he knew. Lo hikpid ela al yedei shesarfu tarotav befanav. He got mad because they burnt up the truma that he says was tahor. They burnt it in front of him. Now, I know we're all very empathetic and sympathetic people. And we're saying, did they have to do that in front of him? Well, people, if at the end of the day they thought that there was truma that was tameya, that people were not allowed to eat, yes, they had to burn it. And he was there, and they had to say to him, this is what we have to do. This is what we have to do. He says, no, that's not what you have to do. And I'm right, and I'm right, and I'm right, and I'm right. Okay. Taman Taninan, there we learned. Chitcho Chuliot. Let's talk about what this Tanur Shel Achnai was. It was actually cut into little strips. V'natan chol ben chulya ben lechulya. Each one of those strips had sand in between it. Rabbi Eliezer mitaher, Rabbi Eliezer thought such an oven was not considered a kli, it was not considered an implement. I mean, it's made out of little strips and sand. Like, that's hardly, a KitchenAid. You know what I'm saying? And he says, it's not a kli, so it does not bekabel tuma, it doesn't accept impurity. So, whereas Chachamim say, no, it is a kli, because it's used as a kli, it's used as an implement, and therefore it can become tameh. Okay? It can become tameh. Zet tanuro shel chachinai. This is the chachinai oven. And Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Rabbi Yirmiyah chachach gadol nasa b'oto hayom. A great, really, it's a big itching. I don't know if that's very weird English, right? Really a great plague happened that day. Kol makom shaita eno shel Rabbi Eliezer mabetet haya nishidaf. Everywhere Rabbi Eliezer would look would become, and I know the English says it was burnt, the Hebrew Aramaic says it was blighted, right? When he looked at something, it was blighted. He had such laser power that he could, half of it blighted and half of it not blighted. And that's when the walls of the Beit Midrash start falling down, which essentially is taken as a danger, an actual threat to the people standing in it. He's trying to kill them. That is how this is to be read. Amar lehen Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yoshua says, what? We're supposed to fight in here. We're supposed to disagree in here. Why are you going to kill us? V'yatza bat kol v'amra, and along came an echo and says, halacha ke'Eliezer b'ni, the halacha follows Eliezer, my son. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, tough luck, lo b'shamayim hi, it's not in heaven. Next thing you know, you have some side conversation where Rabbi Crispy says, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rebbe, editor of the Mishnah, Im Yomar li Adam, if somebody said, Kach Shina, Rabbi Eliezer, this was Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, Shonechi ani chidvarav, I would quote him, right? Now you have, it's almost like the postscript of, do people quote Eliezer anymore? Or is he kind of persona non grata kind of guy, right? Like, people don't look at this as like, poor Rabbi Eliezer. They look at him as, what is wrong with you? Okay? Tanya Mechalfin, but he says, but other people who quote, they actually switch it not to quote his name. Okay? It's very hard to understand what exactly is going on here, but that's my read. And then we're back to the story. Chadzman hava arver b'shuka. Once Rabbi Eliezer was walking in the shuk, v'chamat chada ita. He saw a woman, schota deveta, who was washing her house or sweeping. Utzlakat v'naflat gavreshe. And she threw the stuff over her porch, clearly, and it fell on his head. Amar, he says, Domesh hayom chavera mekarvinoti. I think my friends are going to take me back today, my colleagues. Tichtiv me'ashpot yarim avyon. He says, God takes the poor out of the dung heap. This whole thing, from soup to nuts, is Rabbi Eliezer was wrong. Rabbi Eliezer was wrong. I think we need to get back to the ethos of recognizing that the way that the world works is not always going to follow my opinion. I think I'm going to say it in like the most direct way that I can. We in America have little to no influence over what is decided in the war. That is a feature. It is not a bug. It is a feature. It is not a bug. It doesn't mean you can't say what you want. It doesn't mean you can't be an activist as you want. But a recognition of simply the way things work, what it means to be part of something, is that it has certain ways of being. I am a right-winger in a left-wing shul. You're not going to hear what you are looking for every time. Doesn't mean I'm going to burn your truma in front of you, but that's what it means to have what I would call a rabbinic ethos, right? If you don't want that, then what you end up doing is you can end up doing one of two things. You can be the prophet and be incredibly lonely and do your thing, which might be meaningful and good for you. You can be maybe like Deb's suggestion of like find a community where we're building something and we feel like we're building something. Or you can also just accept that sometimes like it's not my opinion on everything. That's just what it is. And that's really hard. But that's rabbinic Judaism, right? So take a look at this. Yochi Brandis wrote this great book that Rachel Jacoby Rosenfield showed me. It took me like a week to put this together because I've been thinking about this for a year, but I didn't want to be practical. I wanted to be ideational and orientational. So I talked to like all of my colleagues about this, and they each just brought a beautiful piece of the puzzle. And so, has anybody read Yochi Brandis before? Okay, so Yochi Brandis, she does like historical Jewish fiction in a way. She'll take like the book of Melachim and rewrite it as like a story that you can relate to. She'll take here the story of Pardes the story of Arba Nichnesu Lepardes, and she'll rewrite it. So within her rewriting of it, it goes like this. Can I please have some actors? Can I please have some actors? Okay, Risha and Liz. Okay, Risha, you're the first speaker. Liz, you're the second speaker. Go for it.
There is only one punishment that suits the severity of Rabbi Eliezer's actions today. But if we impose it on him, he will again lose his self-control, and this time with far more power. The world is liable to be destroyed. This is not exaggeration.
What is the punishment?
Excommunication.
So choose another punishment. You can reprimand him. You can even remove him. Removal from the Sanhedrin is a most severe punishment.
Removal is insufficient.
That was the punishment you imposed back then on Rabban Gamliel.
There's no comparison. Rabban Gamliel imposed his will upon us and belittled us, but Rabbi Eliezer...
He pauses for a moment.
Rabbi Eliezer tried to kill us.
That's the walls of the Beit Midrash.
He didn't intend to.
He almost did to us what Samson did. Let me die with the Philistines.
Samson despised the temple of Dagon and wanted to destroy it.
And Rabbi Eliezer despises the Beit Midrash and wants to destroy it.
Is that what you think of Rabbi Eliezer? I am stunned.
That is what the members of the Sanhedrin think of him. But I think he intended not to do what Samson did to the Philistines, but rather what Moses did to Korach and his followers. That was how they solved disputes in the days of the Exodus from Egypt. The children of Israel were dependent on Moses and couldn't survive even a single day without his prophecies and miracles. They brought all the problems and issues to him and obeyed him without question. How Rabbi Eliezer longs for those sweet times. In our day, we have a Sanhedrin, a multiplicity of opinions, decisions made by majority vote, and all those other things that annoy him and make his life bitter. I think what Brandes does here is rather brilliant, because what she does is she moves us away from just saying, sometimes there are the rules of the game, and you have to be willing to accept the rules of the game, to actually a feature of our communities right now, and probably for a very long time, is going to be that we don't agree on things. We're going to have to figure out ways to deal in a practical sense. But just accepting that orientation, simply accepting that there will be a multiplicity and that that is the norm at this point, what does that do? How does that liberate you from having to be the one who has all the answers? Or, by the way, having to be the rabbi who gives all the answers? What does it actually look like to talk about that multiplicity as a feature of being in community and not as something that is bad? It's simply something that is. I know people also want to say, but it's something that's good. And we're going to, sure, to a point. Sure. But I also think it's just something that is. And how do we help people actually say, you know how you're going to feel less lonely? Other people are going to have different opinions than you, and you can still come here and pray together. You know how you're not going to feel lonely? I, as your rabbi, am going to recognize that you have different opinions and that I may even have different opinions from you. And yet, I can still be your rabbi, and you can still be my congregants. How do we get people from a fear of that reality to this is our reality? This is who we are, and it is the only way we can walk forward. So basically, what have we done in part 2? We have offered the sense that sometimes people, and often people, look at their very sincerely, genuinely committed, held opinions and perspectives and say, how come people don't see it my way? How come people aren't messaging my way? How come this moment of calamity hasn't convinced you that I've been right the way that I've been telling you? And that is a form of loneliness. It's not the muck, it's responses to the muck of, this is what I definitely think. And two responses that, again, I think could be somewhat complementary, right? One is a response of trying to create affirmative, boundaried coexistence. And boundaries are important. Coexistence is important. It's possible that that boundaried coexistence is only possible in certain types of diversity or a certain range of diversity, or it's possible that you could have a very wide range of diversity and try to figure out how to do it. But there you are actually allowing people, or maybe the community as a whole, to talk about vision forward, rather than strife forward, right? And the second, which is, how do we actually recognize that we cannot control everything? We cannot control other people's opinions. That is not a bad thing or a good thing. It simply is what reality is. And how do we accept that in a deep enough way that we don't take our toys out of the sandbox every time there is somebody else whose opinions we think are even, by the way, like close to anathema. Close to anathema. How do we actually do that? And the reason why I think they might be a little bit in tension with each other is because I think sometimes boundary coexistence actually does lead you to be a little bit narrower in figuring out this is the diversity we can and cannot take because we're actually trying to build something going forward here. We're not really interested in having the arguments and the debates, whereas the multiplicity model is sort of like, I'm not going to be able to build something with all of your opinions in mind. We might be able to build something else that isn't about trying to take all those opinions together. So it's a little bit different. I'm going to pause there and take all of your thoughts. I would love to hear them. Okay, we have Rachel. We have a lot. Let's just go from Rachel this way, like zigzag to Linda. We'll like zigzag, right? Do you see the zigzag? Could everybody raise their hand again so that Alice can see the zigzag of where we're going? Okay, perfect. We'll stay on that side, and then we'll get to you all.
So,
and just introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Rachel. In your second response that we can't control others' opinions, but we don't take our toys out of the sandbox, I like that, but I'm not quite sure I'm totally seeing it. If you had taught, like the Hillel and Shammai or Elu ve'elu, I would have seen how you're getting to that. But it would seem that you're actually saying, the way I'm reading these texts are, the listener shouldn't take their toys out of the sandbox, but in fact, the speaker can give their opinion and should give their opinion, and sort of the leader of the community is welcome to do so. I mean, in the text, which is the Deborah Bear text, when community becomes a zero-sum game, it seems that in fact it's okay, if I'm reading it correctly, it's only one section, that we don't need to necessarily capitulate, and I'm obviously have my bias by using that word, capitulate to certain opinions around anti-Zionism.
Oh, I think that is what Deb's saying. Meaning I think these are two separate but could be complementary. I could see how people could do either of them. I'll tell you how I think they're separate. The way I think they're separate is I think Deb is saying you have a right to your vision. Don't spend your time having arguments about that vision. Spend your time building that vision and making it coherent and making it, right? Like, it's possible that you might have to have multiple Jewish communities.
So is that the boundaried coexistence?
That is the boundaried coexistence. It's not boundary. The boundary means you might have to have your own community. The boundary means you might not be able to have everybody on the board who has been coming to the synagogue for a long time.
And then the Rabbi Eliezer So is there any place in your presentation for somebody saying, this is very nice, but this just might not be the place for me?
So I think that if Rabbi Eliezer had wanted, he didn't have to come back.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted to come back.
He wanted to come back, but it's okay for leaders to say, like, this is who we are.
Yes.
Okay.
Meaning, I think
I misunderstood.
No problem. Let's do, instead of being instead of having to, no, I always like to be tied to the text. So let's do it like this. I want to be super, super, super clear. In Deb's example, What she's trying to say, I think, or how I read her, that's a better way to say it. How I read her is she's saying, you're allowed to have boundaries. Don't spend all your social, emotional, spiritual capital on fighting people over the boundary. Spend your spiritual, emotional capital building your vision. And I'm saying it is possible to do that within a diverse community, but then you're going to have to find something that everybody agrees on. I think it actually points a little bit more towards, it's okay to have your vision. That's okay. Like, that's okay. The Rabbi Eliezer text is essentially, look, you have to understand that you're part of something. And when you're part of something, institutions, community, Jewish peoplehood, you don't control every aspect of it. And when you don't control every aspect of it, it might be frustrating, but you have to recognize that if you want to belong to that larger thing, you have to actually be willing to admit that you can't control every part of it. And I think this is as true for American Jews understanding Israel and Israeli Jews understanding American Jews, right? As it is for people who are in a synagogue that might be going in a certain direction, that's the direction that the synagogue is going in, but that's not their direction. If they want to be part of it, they may have to compromise in that regard. They may have to compromise, or they may say, this isn't for me. I want to go to a place that's doing my vision, right? Like, that's why I say in some ways they might be complementary, but they're not the same. Thank you for pushing me to articulate. I was rushing a little bit because I wanted to make sure we get it all in. Okay, we're continuing the zigzag.
Hi, I'm Linda. I very much appreciate what you've just said in response to what Rachel has raised. So I'm going to change my observation a little bit. Just to say that I suspect that, I won't say most, but many of the people here are in a pulpit or in a position to address people in a congregation and aren't in the same position as someone who will join this congregation or not want to join this congregation, or I'll go here or I'll go there on this Shabbat, I'll go here on that, and I have you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
And at some point, it seems to be in not only the, well, I think it's incumbent upon a leader in that respect at some point, as it were, to fish or cut bait. That at some point we can't always successfully entertain all possibilities and all opinions because we don't think that they're valid, and we may even think that some of them are destructive.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. You're allowed to think something's wrong.
That is
or
the
destructive.
ongoing dilemma, I think.
It's such a funny thing. I have a book on my shelf that I got from Ruth Gavison. You know Ruth Gavison, Hebrew University professor? They gave away her books in her house like a few months ago. First of all, it was crazy. It's like whatever the equivalent is of like a raid in camp. It was that. You had people walking with like 25 books and falling. So I got a book by Peter Berger that's Between Fundamentalism and Relativism. I think that's a very hard place to sit. I think it's much easier to be a fundamentalist or just a relativist and say, I agree with everything. And you're saying, I'm neither of those things, but when I see something that I think is wrong, I think it's wrong. And I'm allowed to think it's wrong, right? Like I think that's very powerful. And it's hard to do, but I think it's powerful. Okay, let's keep going. The zigzag continues. We're zigging and zagging. And just say your name for everybody if you don't mind.
Thank you for all of this wonderful learning. And I'm sitting here thinking about the American experience of this moment. And in fact, Israeli experience as well, which is you decide which camp you're part of, and then you are opposite the other camp. And so all of this perspective that we can find about how you can build back those relationships is very difficult in an environment where we are expected to follow the path of the tribe we have joined.
Yes.
The divisions are so strict and so firm that overcoming them feels like a hike up a mountain.
Yeah.
So how can we take this to actually achieve that hike?
Well, so it's such an interesting thing. Two of my colleagues in Israel, for the big day of the big strike day last week, both of them think the war should be over and that they want the hostages to be returned. But one of them went to the strike and the other one didn't. And they were asked, as in a good Talmudic story, right? They were asked, or a good Rebbe story, why did you go? Why did you not? Right? So I went because I want to be able to say that I did whatever I could. And the other one said, well, actually, I've been working with a group this year that's trying to bring Israelis together from all sectors, and I don't think ultimately this solves it. So, and she said, I don't know if it would be, maybe it is going to be efficacious in the short run, but certainly not in the long run. But I'm not even sure it's efficacious in the short run. Whereas the other one said, of course it's efficacious in the short run. And you need to actually do something right now because we're in an urgent moment. So I think these are different impulses that are all legitimate impulses. And to a degree, sometimes it's actually your personality that dictates whether you're going to be one of those liminal people to try to bring people together, or you're going to be one of those people who says, I'm standing as an activist and committed where I am, or whether you can be one of those weirdos who does both, because there are such people, right? There are such people. But I think this is part of the muck. This is part of the chaos that we're experiencing. Thanks. Yeah, Barry.
Thank you, Elana. Barry Gelman. I'm wondering if you could speak to whether or not you think these sources, which are largely talking about ritual disagreements, to higher stakes, and whether shared space is really possible if I think the person sitting across the table from me is going to their position will actually lead to the death of many, many people, and that person thinks the same thing about my position. Yeah. And whether or not we could really marshal these sources to talk about existential issues, because that's not what they're on the surface. Certainly, that's not what these rabbis are arguing about.
Great. So a few thoughts about that. One is what we might be talking about is a methodology, right? A methodology for how people engage with each other. And what felt very salient for them is different than what feels salient for us, but it did feel very salient to them, I would say. But the second is, part of what you're talking about is how much do you actually have in common with those people who you're in the sandbox with? Right? Rabbi Eliezer has a lot in common with those other people in the sandbox. If they didn't have that much in common, at some point you're sort of like, it doesn't make sense for us to be here anymore. And I think one of the things that we're being tested about right now is if somebody thinks the war should continue and somebody else thinks the war should end, all the other things that we have in common, love of Israel, care about the hostages, care about the future of Jews all over the world, are all of those things not party to this discussion? Do all of those things now fade into the background, and the only thing that we are right now is in opposition in that way? I think the question of where you draw that line is actually the answer to your question, right? I think that people who have a whole lot in common all the way up the tree trunk, in terms of their ideals, in terms of their values, and then they start to branch at certain ways, that's very different than if the tree trunk itself is not. Now, different communities, and Daniel Grieber, I'm going to call you out because we had this conversation in North Carolina a little while ago. Different communities might think that trunk is split or not split by certain issues, right? It's not necessarily, but you want to say something in response.
I would just respond and say that at
some
point, like the pikuach nefesh issue may lead to me thinking, I really like, it's great that you want the state of Israel to continue to exist, so do I, but we are now talking about pikuach nefesh, so now nothing that we thought we had in common really matters, and I can't be with you.
I just think then you can't have a state of Israel even. How do you sit in Knesset? Exactly. Right. So meaning you're right. Meaning you're right. This is the question that is being asked locally, nationally, globally. Right. It's the question. I just think human existence cannot be predicated upon agreement. It doesn't make any sense. It's just not the way the world works. So the question of who are your closest ties, we call it in our family rooms. Like if you were to if you invited too many people to your birthday party, and there are some people who are your best friends and you want to see them the whole time. There are some people who like, rooms, right? So what rooms would you put them all in, right? But if everything is a kamsa bar kamsa, we have a problem. There has to be a room. There has to be a room. By the way, even when they put Rabbi Eliezer in excommunication, they took him back at some point, right? They invited him back at some point. So I just don't think the world works that way. I really don't. It might be a shul community can't do that. It might be a family can't do that. A country has to be able to do that. It does. Meaning, yes, are there some people who are so problematic and are inflicting so that you put them in prison? Sure. Right? Sure. But that's the whole of society is trying to figure out how we deal with disparity. Like I think we're just living it in a very intense moment, but that is what the world is. I sat with a religious Zionist leader a few months ago, and this is somebody who like 20 months ago was writing things like, we need a new Torah, we need everybody to be together. And he says to me, we are in a fight between Malchut Beit Israel, Malchut Beit David, and Malchut Beit Shaul. The secular Jews are Malchut Beit Shaul, and we need to get rid of them. And the religious Jews are Malchut Beit David. I was like, what happened to you? What happened to you? I know what happened to him. His friends' kids died. His family they want to be able to go back into Gaza, meaning they want to take it over. I know what happened to him. These people are a danger to him. That's what happened to him. Malchut Beit David versus Malchut Shaul was so bloody. It was so bloody. We can't. Hanukkah is a last resort, civil war of Hanukkah. It's not a first resort, right? So that's where I am. I can't, human beings can't exist that way. They can't exist that way. So that's where I am. Let's take one more comment from this side. Yes, Adam. Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Adam Rudetsky.
Hi, Adam Rudetsky, everybody.
Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Adam Rudetsky, Plano, Texas. So I was thinking about this idea of loneliness, and I think for me that's tied into the idea of brokenness. In the sense of, I think of a Kol Yisrael Revim Zeh B'Zeh. We're not. That's not how we deal with each other. We're supposed to be, but we're not responsible. So you mentioned Yitz's book. So he has one of my favorite quotes from his, that the ideal is the enemy of the impossible. And to me, the ideal is the right way, the way it needs to be. This is my way, it's different than yours way. And the possible is the fact that diversity is possible. So we make the ideal of absolutism the way it destroys the possible of being diverse. So the brokenness, again, the loneliness, as I look at our community, and it's so broken, it's so divided, there's so many ideals, there's this way, there's the right way. And you mentioned the word, I don't remember which text, but you mentioned the word fear. And I realized that our community, at least in my sense, is fearful of being diverse. Because if we're diverse, it opens possible doors to influences coming in or views coming in that I might not agree with, my ideal. So connecting with Rabbi Eliezer and saying my way is not going to be the right way, I have to allow for the possible that my ideal is not going to be accepted. That's what I was thinking of, and I was wondering if you could speak into that.
Well, so what I think is interesting is what you said and what Linda said are in conversation with each other. Because on the one hand, you want to be able to have multiplicity. The world exists in multiplicity, and it's also to what Barry is talking about. But on the other end, you don't want to just become a relativist, right? You want to actually have boundaries. So trying to figure out where to sit there, and different people put their boundaries in different places. right? What I'm essentially saying is that in order for communities to subsist, there have to be boundaries that include, not everything that's just your way as an individual, right? Not everything, right? But what's not everything? That's not so easy. That's definitions. All right, my friends, I hope this gave you some food for thought. Thank you all so much. Enjoy your lunch. Don't laugh, but I have to run to the dentist because I'm going back to Israel tomorrow. I have to get my new crown on, so I will not be around to hang with everybody. But I'm always around and be in touch, and it's always great to learn with you and from you. And Ketiva v'chatima tova. Thank you for everything that you do for your communities, for the Jewish people as a whole, and for the world. You're just such inspirations to all of us. Really, really, really. Thank you.